The order to vote came down before the human ship had finished arriving. Vale Anuth was a page of the third tier, and on the morning everything changed, she was carrying a tray of voting stones across the upper gallery of the Senate platform. The platform was a ring of gray stone and white light that hung above a dead moon, and it had hung there for 900 years, and in all that time, it had never once been quiet. The Senate of the Settled Voices was always speaking. That was the whole point of it. 3,000 delegates from 400 worlds sat in the great bowl below her, and they did not argue, and they did not shout, because they had all agreed long ago that argument was a sickness, and that a single calm voice was health. Vale set the tray down at her station, and tried to make herself small. She was young, only 40 cycles, which was young for her kind. She had no vote. She had no name that anyone in the bowl would ever say. Her job was to carry the stones from the counting room to the tally floor, and to never, ever, look at the delegates while they decided. The vote that morning had been a routine one, the kind the Senate held 100 times a year. A new world had been found in the outer dark, a small one, 4 billion souls who still argued among themselves about the shape of their own future. The motion before the bowl was a simple one. Should the world be settled? Should the fleets of the unanimity go out and make it calm? There was no debate, because there never was. The speaker felt that the world should be settled, and so 3,000 delegates felt it too, and the stones would come down on the side of yes, and Vale would carry them. And somewhere 400 light-years away, 4 billion people who did not yet know her name would, in a year or two, stop being able to disagree about anything at all. Vale had carried the stones for 30 such votes. She had never thought about the worlds on the other end of them. You were not supposed to. A page who thought about the worlds began to think about the people on the worlds, and a page who thought about the people began, sometimes, to wonder whether they had wanted to be settled, and that way lay the only true sin the settled voices recognized, which was the sin of imagining yourself as separate. Vale had committed that sin exactly once, 3 nights ago, alone in her room, and she had told no one, and she had spent every hour since pretending to herself that she had not. But that morning, the light above the Senate had changed. It happened so softly that for a long moment no one moved. The great window at the top of the dome, the one that looked out at the stars, had gone from black to a strange deep color, like the inside of an old shell. And in the middle of that color, there was a shape. It was a ship. It had not folded in. It had not burned across the dark on a column of fire the way honest ships did. It had simply become there, the way a word becomes there when you finally remember it, and it was very large, and it was very still. Vale forgot the rule. She looked up. The ship was longer than the Senate platform itself. It was the color of cold iron and old gray water, and it had no lights on it anywhere, not one, which frightened her more than any number of guns would have. Every ship she had ever seen wore its lights like jewels, to be seen, to be known, to be measured. This ship wore nothing. It hung above the dead moon, like a knife laid flat on a table, and it watched the Senate with a patience that made her skin crawl. A delegate near the floor made a sound. It was the first unplanned sound Vale had heard in that room in her whole life. She did not know, then, how strange a thing she had just witnessed. The delegates of the settled voices did not make unplanned sounds. They did not cough out of turn, or gasp, or murmur, because they were not, in any way that mattered, separate enough to be surprised on their own. When one of them felt a thing, all of them felt it, in the same instant, smoothed and shared and made small by the sharing. A surprise that belonged to 3,000 minds at once was not really a surprise at all. It was just weather passing through a single enormous sky. For a delegate to make a sound before the rest, alone, ahead of the consensus, was as impossible as a single drop of water leaping up out of a still pond by itself. And yet one had. Vale heard it, and her skin went cold, and she did not understand why until much later. The iron ship had not even spoken yet. It had only arrived, and already, somehow, just by being there, just by being one thing that was wholly itself and would not lean, it had reached into the great calm pond of the settled voices and made a single drop leap. Below her, the speaker of the settled voices rose from the central seat. The speaker was old, the oldest living thing on the platform, and her body was wrapped in the pale gray cloth of unity. When she spoke, 3,000 throats moved with her. Just a little, the way they always did, because that was the gift of the settled voices. They were many bodies, and one will. They felt what the speaker felt. They knew what she knew. It was, the teachers had always told Vale, the most beautiful thing in the galaxy. No loneliness, no doubt, no single small mind shivering by itself in the dark. The speaker looked up at the iron ship and said, in the voice that was every voice, "Identify yourselves." The ship did not answer. The speaker waited. 3,000 delegates waited with her, all leaning the same small amount, all breathing in the same slow rhythm, and Vale, standing at her little station with her tray of stones, felt the pull of it the way she always did. The pull to lean with them, to breathe with them, to stop being one small frightened page and to melt into the great calm of the whole. She almost did. She had always almost done it. She was a third-tier page, and one day, if she was good, she would be allowed to join the voice fully, to drink the consensus, and never be alone again, and on most days, that was all she wanted. But the iron ship was looking at her, not at the speaker, at her. She could not have said how she knew this, but she felt seen in a way she had never been seen in her life, seen as one, as Vale, as a single small thing that was not the same as everyone around her, and instead of frightening her more, it did something strange. It steadied her. It steadied her the way a hand on your shoulder steadies you, the way a voice in the dark that knows your name steadies you. And Vale had never in her life felt either of those things, because in the world of the settled voices, there were no shoulders that were only yours, and no name in the dark that was only yours. There was only the warm shared everything, the great calm pond, the gift. And the gift had never once felt to Vale quite the way the teachers said it should. She had never told anyone that. You could not tell anyone that. To say the gift felt wrong was to say that you yourself were wrong, broken, sick. A single drop of water that for some shameful reason would not lie flat in the pond like all the others. She had spent 40 cycles trying to lie flat. She had almost managed it. And then, 3 nights ago, alone in the dark of the page's dormitory, the part of her that would not lie flat had finally spoken, just once, just to herself, and she had been so frightened by what it said that she had not slept since. She did not know, looking up at the iron ship now, that it had heard the thing she said 3 nights ago. She only knew that for the first time in her life, something in the universe was looking at her, as if being a single drop that would not lie flat was not a sickness at all. As if it were the whole point. As if it were the only thing worth crossing 1,000 light-years to find. The speaker spoke again, and now there was an edge under the calm. You are in the sky of the settled voices. 400 worlds speak here as one. You will identify yourselves, or you will be removed. Vale knew what removal meant. She had carried the stones for those votes too. When a world refused to settle its voice, when a colony or a clan insisted on keeping its own small arguments, the Senate voted, and the fleets of the unanimity went out, and the world was quieted, not destroyed. The settled voices did not destroy, they corrected. They went down to a loud world, and they made it calm, one mind at a time, until it leaned with all the rest. Vale had grown up being told this was mercy. She had believed it. She mostly still did. The iron ship answered at last. It did not speak in the speaker's frequency, and it did not speak in any of the 400 tongues of the settled worlds. It spoke on every channel at once, on the open air, on the closed air, on the private threads the delegates used to feel one another, and it spoke in a flat, plain voice that did not lean, did not soothe, did not try to join anything. A single voice, a whole voice, a voice that was only itself and was not ashamed of it. It said, "This is the Warship Unwritten Hour. We have been listening to you for 200 years. We came when one voice asked us to." The bowl of the Senate went very still. Vale's tray trembled in her hands. One voice. The phrase landed in that hall of the many as one, like a stone dropped into still water. One voice had asked them to come. Not a world, not a Senate, not a settled, sanded, smooth consensus of 3,000 throats. One. The speaker's calm cracked, just for a heartbeat, and through the threads that bound the delegates, Vale felt the crack pass through 3,000 minds at once. A flinch, a flicker of something the settled voices had spent 900 years teaching itself it could not feel. Fear. And high in the gallery, holding her tray of voting stones, a third-tier page named Vale Anuth realized that she was smiling, and that she did not know why, and that she could not stop. The speaker recovered first, because she always did, because she was the deepest drink of the whole voice, and the strongest will among them. "There is no one voice," she said, and 3,000 throats firmed under her like a floor coming back to level. "There are only worlds that have settled, and worlds that have not yet. A ship that listens to one voice, listens to a sickness. You have come at the call of a single unhealed mind. We pity it, we will heal it, and we will heal you, and you will be glad." On the iron ship there was a pause. Vale had the strange feeling, standing in the gallery, that the pause was not confusion, it was courtesy. The way you pause before correcting a child who has said something both wrong and sad. "You file your conquests as health," the unwritten hour said. "We have read your records. We have read all of them. You have quieted 311 worlds in 900 years. You did not destroy them. We know. You did something your own language does not have a clean word for, so you borrowed a kind one. You called it settling. You went down to worlds full of people who disagreed with each other, who argued, who loved different things and wanted different futures, and you took the disagreement out of them, one mind at a time, until each world leaned the same way and breathed the same breath, and could no longer remember a single thing it had ever wanted on its own. The voice did not rise. That was the terrible part. It never rose. "You think this is peace," it said. "We have come to tell you what it actually is." The speaker tried, then, to do the thing the settled voices had always done to anything that spoke against them. She tried to settle the warship's voice. Vale felt her reach out through the threads, the way she had reached out 311 times before, the great warm gathering pressure that had quieted whole worlds. The speaker turned that pressure on the single flat voice coming out of the iron ship, the way a healer might turn a balm on a wound, and Vale felt 3,000 minds lean with her, all of them pushing at once, all of them trying to smooth the lonely human voice into the warm consensus, to make it lean, to make it one of them, to end its terrible separateness the only way they knew how. It was like pushing on a mountain. The voice did not lean, it did not soften, it did not even seem to notice the pressure of the largest mind in the galaxy, bearing down on it with the full weight of 900 years. It simply went on being itself, flat and plain and whole. A single voice that had been alone in the dark for so long that loneliness had stopped being a wound and become a kind of armor, a thing so completely accustomed to standing by itself that nothing in the galaxy could make it lean. Vale felt the speaker push, and push, and push, and felt the human voice not move, and felt, through the threads, the first cold thread of true fear pass through the whole Senate at once. They could not settle it. For the first time in their history, the settled voices had met a voice they could not quiet. "Stop trying," the unwritten hour said, not unkindly. "We know what you are doing. You have done it to everyone you have ever met, until you forgot there was anything else to do. You cannot settle us. We have spent 1,000 years learning how to be one voice that does not lean. It is the only thing we know how to do, and we have gotten very good at it. Now, listen, instead of pushing. You have never once listened. It is time you learned." In the bowl below, a delegate stood up. This was not allowed. Delegates did not stand alone. They rose with the speaker, sat with the speaker, leaned with the whole. But this one stood by itself, a thin figure from one of the outer settled worlds, and it stood the way a person stands when something inside them that was supposed to be asleep has just woken up. Vale watched, breathless. Through the threads she felt the voice grab for that delegate, felt the warm, enormous pressure of 3,000 minds reaching to fold the lone one back in, to smooth it, to settle it. And she felt the iron ship do something to the threads. She would spend the rest of her life trying to describe it, and she would never quite manage. It was not a weapon, nothing fired. The lights did not even flicker. But across the whole platform, in every delegate and every page and every soul wired into the great consensus, the pressure to lean simply stopped pushing. For one heartbeat, the threads that bound the settled voices went slack, and 3,000 minds hung suddenly loose, untouched, alone. It lasted less than a second. Then the voice snapped back, hard, and the standing delegate sat down, folded back into the hole, his small rebellion sanded smooth before it could become a sentence. But Vale had felt it, everyone had felt it. For one heartbeat the warship had reached into the most sacred machinery of the settled voices, the machinery 900 years of the most careful work in the galaxy had built, and it had loosened the bolts with no more effort than a person flexing a hand. The speaker's face had gone the color of ash. "What are you?" she said, and for the first time it was a question and not a command. "We told you," said the unwritten hour. "We are a warship. We were built by a species that learned the hardest lesson the galaxy teaches, and learned it earlier than most, and paid more for it than you can imagine. We are going to tell you the lesson now. You should listen, because the next part of this depends on whether you can." Vale set down her tray. Her hands had stopped shaking. She did not know yet that this was the moment her old life ended. She only knew that she wanted, more than she had ever wanted anything, to hear what the iron ship was about to say. "We come from a world that almost did to itself what you do to others," the ship said. "Long ago, our people were frightened of how loud we were. We argued, we fought, we wanted different things and we said so, and it was painful, and it was dangerous, and many of us died for the things we believed. So a great many of our wisest minds decided, as yours did, that the loudness was a disease. They built machines and methods to quiet it. They found ways to make many minds lean together. They promised an end to loneliness, and an end to doubt, and an end to war. And the price was small. The price was only every single thing that made a person a person. We came very close to paying it." "Then you should understand us," the speaker said quickly. "Then you, of all peoples, should understand the peace we offer." "We understand you completely," the ship said. "That is the problem. We understand you better than you understand yourselves. We did not pay the price. At the very edge of it, with the machines half built and the first worlds half quieted, a small number of us refused. They were called stubborn. They were called sick. They were hunted. And they were right. They tore the machines down. They argued for the right to keep arguing. They bled for the right to stay loud and separate and difficult and free. And when it was over, we made a promise to ourselves, and we built ships to keep it." "What promise?" the speaker whispered. "That we would never let it happen to anyone else. Not in our sky. Not in any sky. We sent ships out into the dark, quiet ships, listening ships, and we told them to wait, to learn the galaxy, to find the places where the many were being made one against their will, and to be ready, on the day a single voice called for help, to answer." The speaker laughed. It was a brittle sound, a single laugh from a single throat, and it was so unlike the warm shared murmur the Senate usually made, that Vale flinched at it. "Ships," the speaker said. "You sent ships, into a galaxy of 400 settled worlds, and 10,000 others besides. A galaxy so large that light itself grows old crossing it. And you expected, what? To hear one small voice in all of that dark? Do you know how many minds cry out in this galaxy on any given night, Warship? Billions. Do you know how many of them are afraid? All of them. The dark is full of fear. It is nothing but fear, end to end. A ship that listened for one frightened voice in all of that would hear only noise forever. We did not listen for fear, the unwritten hour said. Fear is common. You are right. The dark is full of it. We listened for something else, something so rare that when it sounds, it carries across 1,000 light years clean as a struck bell through a quiet room. We listened for a frightened mind that, in its last hour, chose to be itself instead of choosing to be safe. Almost no one does this. It goes against everything a living thing is built to do. When the warm, easy comfort is offered, and the cold, lonely truth is the only other choice, nearly every mind in the galaxy reaches for the warmth. That is why your settling works. That is why it has always worked. You are not fighting the will of your worlds. You are fighting nothing, because the will to be one is the easiest will there is, and the will to be separate is the hardest, and you simply offer the easy thing and let the worlds fall into it like water finding the low place. The voice paused, and when it came again it was quieter. But once in a very long while, it said, a mind chooses the hard thing, chooses the cold, chooses to be one small, real, frightened, separate self, rather than a warm and happy part of a whole. And when a mind does that, it rings. We have been listening for that ring for 1,000 years. It is the only sound in all the dark that we have ever cared to hear. The speaker shook her head slowly, and there was something almost like pity in it, the pity of a healthy thing for a sick one. 1,000 years, she said. You have crewed a ship for 1,000 years to listen for a sound that almost never comes. Do you know how that sounds to us, Warship? It sounds like grief. It sounds like a wound that will not close. It sounds like a people so broken by their own loneliness that they have built a machine the size of a moon to go looking for company in the screams of the dying. We do not want to hurt you. Truly, the more you speak, the more clearly we hear how much pain you are in, and the more we wish only to help you. Lay down the listening. Come into the warm. There is room in the voice for you. There has always been room. You have suffered so long, and for nothing, and it can simply stop. Let it stop. And for the first time, the iron ship was quiet for a long moment, and when it answered, Vale heard something underneath the flat, plain voice that she had not heard before. Not weakness, the opposite of weakness. The sound of a thing that has been through the exact fire the speaker was offering, and walked out the far side, and would never, ever go back in. You think the listening is our wound, the unwritten hour said. You have it backwards, the way you have everything backwards, because you have never once in 900 years stood outside the warm, long enough to see it clearly. The listening is not our grief, the listening is our love. We do not crew this ship for 1,000 years, because we are broken. We crew it because long ago we learned, in a war that nearly ended us, exactly what it cost to be free, and exactly what it cost to be quieted. And we decided that no mind anywhere should ever again be quieted without one single ship in all the dark, willing to cross 1,000 years to say, we heard you, you were real, you were not alone. That is not a wound, that is the most whole thing our kind has ever built. You are looking at 1,000 years of refusing to look away, and you are calling it pain, because you have spent your whole life believing that the cure for pain is to stop being the kind of thing that can feel it. We did the opposite. We chose to keep feeling it, forever, on purpose. That is the difference between us, speaker, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered. Vale's breath caught. 200 years ago, the unwritten hour said, a child on one of your newest settled worlds sent a message into the dark. She did not know we existed. She was not asking us. She was just a small mind in the last hour before the quieting reached her, and she was afraid, and she did the thing your people have spent 900 years teaching the galaxy not to do. She spoke for herself. She said, I am here, and I do not want this. And I do not want to forget that I do not want this. And if anyone can hear me, please, remember that I was real. The hall was utterly silent. Even the threads had gone quiet. We heard her, the ship said. We were too far to reach her in time. By the time we could have come, she had been settled, and the small, loud, real thing that was her had been folded into your beautiful calm, and her own world does not remember she ever had a different thought. But we kept the message. We have carried it for 200 years, and we have spent those 200 years doing exactly one thing. Listening, the speaker said. The word came out of her like something pulled. Learning you, the unwritten hour agreed. Mapping you. Reading every record you keep, and you keep so many, counting your fleets, measuring your threads, finding the place where your great voice is woven, and learning, slowly, patiently, for 200 years, exactly how it is tied. We did not come here today by accident. We did not stumble into your sky. We have known where this platform hangs for 190 years. We came now because we are finally ready, and because a second voice called. In the gallery, very quietly, Vale Anuth realized that she had been crying. She did not know whose second voice it was. She did not know it was hers. She did not know that 3 nights ago, alone in the page's dormitory, sleepless, and full of a doubt she had no name for, she had whispered into the dark of her own room the most forbidden thought a child of the settled voices could have. She had whispered, I do not think I want to be one of you. I think I want to be only me. And she had been so ashamed of it that she had told no one, had barely let herself remember it in the morning. She did not know the iron ship had heard. But the ship knew. And below her, The speaker of the settled voices, sensing something she could not name, turned her old head slowly upward, toward the gallery, toward the pages, searching the high tiers for the source of a wrongness she could feel through the threads but could not find. "You speak of one voice and a second voice," the speaker said, and her calm was a brittle thing now, a shell over something rising. "But you are one ship. We are 400 worlds. We are 3,000 wills, made one. We are the largest single mind that has ever existed in this galaxy, and we did not become that by being weak. You have shown us a parlor trick with our threads. Very well. You are strong, but you are one, and we are the unanimity. Call your single voices. Sing your songs of the lonely small self. It will not save you. When the many decide, the few are quieted. That is the only law that has ever held in the dark." "We know your law," the unwritten hour said. "We have come to break it." And then, for the first time, the ship moved. It was not a fast thing. That was what made it so dreadful to watch. The unwritten hour was vast, and it turned in the dark above the dead moon the way a continent might turn, slow and total and unhurried. And as it turned, Vale saw the side of it that had been hidden, and the whole gallery saw it with her, and a sound went through 3,000 delegates that the settled voices had not made in 900 years. It was the sound of people who had just understood that they were not safe. The side of the iron ship was a wall of doors, hundreds of them. Vale could not count them, the numbers were too large, but later she would learn there were 906, one for each year the settled voices had been quieting worlds, though whether that was an accident or a message she never decided. The doors were closed. They were gray and seamless and dark. And they were aimed, every one of them, not at the platform, not at the fleets, but at the great woven knot at the center of the Senate dome, the place where the threads of the voice were tied, the heart of the unanimity itself. "You built your power by taking the one and drowning it in the many," the unwritten hour said. "Every world you quieted, you tied into the knot. 311 worlds, 3,000 delegates, one voice. You think this makes you strong. You are about to learn what we learned, the hard way, 1,000 years ago, in our own burning sky. A mind made of many, who are not allowed to disagree, is not strong. It is brittle. It has only one answer, and if that answer is wrong, every part of it is wrong at once. It cannot turn. It cannot doubt. It cannot save itself. Because to save itself, it would have to let one part of it think a thought the rest did not approve." Vale looked at the wall of doors, and at the great woven knot at the heart of the dome that they were aimed at, and she felt, for the first time in her life, that she understood something the whole Senate did not. The knot was the most beautiful thing on the platform. She had grown up beneath it. It hung at the center of the dome like a frozen storm of light. 311 strands for 311 worlds. Each strand braided of 1,000 smaller threads. Each thread, the bound and quieted will of a single living mind. The teachers had told her it was a tapestry of peace. They had told her that every thread in it had once been a lonely, frightened, separate thing, and that the knot had gathered them all in and given them rest, and that there was no grief in it anywhere, only the great warm sleep of the many made one. But the iron ship had aimed its doors at the knot and called it a wound, and a chain, and a cage built out of love. And Vale, looking up at the beautiful frozen storm of light that she had loved her whole life, found that she could no longer see the peace in it. She could only see the threads, 311 worlds of them, billions of small, real frightened selves, each one folded in and smoothed away, each one a person who had once, somewhere, on some last morning, wanted something of their own. And she thought of the child who had sent a message into the dark, the 11-year-old whose name no one knew, and she understood that the child was in there somewhere, a single thread among billions, her last brave separate thought tied off and tucked away where her own world could never find it. It was not a tapestry of peace. It was the largest grave in the galaxy, and the people in it were still alive, and that was the worst part. The speaker rose to her full height. 3,000 delegates rose with her, the largest unified motion in the galaxy, the whole bowl standing as one body, and the threads sang with a power that made the air itself feel heavy. "Fire on us," the speaker said, "and you fire on 400 worlds. We are not afraid to die together. We have never been afraid of anything together. That is the gift. That is the thing your lonely little selves will never understand. Strike the knot, Warship, and watch 3,000 minds feel no fear at all. Because we do not fear alone. Go on, open your doors. There was a silence. And then the unwritten hour said the thing that Veil Anuth would carry with her. One single small carried thing. For the whole of her long and difficult and gloriously unsettled life. We did not come to kill the many, the warship said. We came to free the one. We are not going to fire on your worlds. We have read your knot for 200 years, and we know exactly where every thread of every quieted world is tied, and we are going to do something far worse to you than killing you. What? The speaker said. It was barely a word. We are going to give every one of them back the thing you took, the unwritten hour said. We are going to cut the knot one strand at a time, and we are going to let 3,000 minds remember, all at once, what it was to be themselves. We are going to make the unanimity hear, for the first time in 900 years, the sound of 3,000 different people deciding 3,000 different things. The doors on the side of the warship began, very slowly, to open. You call that horror, the ship said. We call it mourning. The speaker did not waste time on threats after that. She did the thing the settled voices always did when words ran out. She called the fleet. Through the threads, in less than a heartbeat, the order went from the central seat to 3,000 delegates, to 400 worlds, to the standing fleets of the unanimity, and there was no argument, no delay, no general who hesitated, because there were no separate generals, only the one voice deciding, and 10,000 hands obeying at once. That was the gift, and the gift was also a blade, and the speaker drew it now. From behind the dead moon they came. Vale watched from the gallery as the sky filled. The fleet of the unanimity was the largest single fighting force in the known dark, and it had never lost, because it had never had to argue with itself about how to win. 2,000 warships rose over the curve of the dead moon, in perfect order, every hull turned at the same angle, every weapon charging in the same instant, a wall of light and metal so vast that it blotted out the stars. Vale had seen the fleet at parade. She had carried the voting stones for the orders that sent it out. She had always thought it beautiful. She did not think it was beautiful now. She thought it looked like a single enormous hand closing into a fist. 2,000 warships. Vale tried to make the number mean something, and could not. Each ship in the fleet of the unanimity was a city, crewed by 10,000 souls, and the souls were not separate souls. They were threads of the one voice, hands of the one will, and they did not fly their ships. They were flown, the way your fingers do not decide for themselves to close. There was a terrible efficiency in it. No human navy, the warship would tell her later, had ever moved with such perfect unity. Because no human navy had ever been one mind. 2,000 ships turned at the same angle, in the same instant, because there was no second opinion anywhere in the fleet to slow them. 2,000 weapons charged together, because there was no gunner aboard any of them who had ever, in his whole life, made a single choice that was only his own. And that, the iron ship had said, was not strength. That was the thing Vale could not yet understand, standing in the gallery with the fleet rising in the window. It looked like the strongest thing she had ever seen. It looked unbeatable. A single will, 2,000 hulls, no doubt, no delay, no weakness anywhere. How could one ship, however clever, however patient, stand against a thing like that? She would learn how within the minute. But in that minute, watching the fist close, she believed, the way the whole Senate believed, the way the galaxy had believed for 900 years, that the many would win, because the many always won. It was the last thing she ever believed without choosing to. 2,000 ships against one. The threads sang with certainty. 3,000 delegates felt the same warm, sure thing at the same moment, the thing they had felt 311 times before, the calm of the overwhelming many, about to quiet the troublesome one. Vale felt it pull at her too, the awful comfort of it, the invitation to stop being afraid by stopping being herself. The unwritten hour did not turn to face the fleet. That was the first thing Vale noticed, and it was the thing that told her, before anything else, that the settled voices had already lost. The warship did not turn. It kept its 906 open doors aimed at the knot at the heart of the Senate, and it let the entire fleet of the unanimity rise behind it, unanswered, ignored. as if 2,000 warships were a weather she did not need to look at. "You will lower your doors," the speaker said, and now the calm was gone entirely, and the voice that was 3,000 voices had a ragged edge in it that the settled voices had spent 9 centuries pretending could not exist. "You will lower your doors, or my fleet will open you to the dark." "Your fleet cannot fire," the unwritten hour said. "My fleet will fire on my word." "Your fleet is 2,000 ships," the warship said, "tied into one will." "Which is your will, speaker, drawn down through 3,000 delegates and woven into the knot at the center of this hall. We have been reading that knot for 200 years. We told you we know where every thread is tied. We were not boasting, we were warning you. The same threads that make your fleet move as one are the threads we are about to cut. You cannot fire 2,000 ships with one will if you no longer have one will." "Test it," the speaker spat. "Open your doors and find out whether the unanimity." The unwritten hour fired. Not at the fleet, not at the platform. The light that came out of those 906 doors was not the hot tearing light of the weapons Vale knew. It was pale, and it was cold, and it did not burn. It poured out of the warship in a single silent wave, and it washed over the great woven knot at the heart of the Senate dome, the sacred place, the loom of the voice, and where it touched the threads it did not break them with force. It untied them. Vale felt it happen inside her own skull. For her whole life she had stood at the very edge of the great consensus, a third-tier page, not yet drinking the full voice, but always feeling its warmth at the rim of her mind, the constant soft pressure of 3,000 others leaning gently against the walls of her thoughts. She had never known a moment without it. She had been born into the pressure the way a fish is born into water, and she had never once imagined that the water could simply stop. It stopped. The cold pale light washed across the knot, and one strand at a time, faster and faster, the threads of the unanimity came untied, and the pressure at the rim of Vale's mind fell away, and for the first time in 40 cycles of life she was, completely and absolutely, alone inside her own head. She did not scream. Some of the delegates screamed. All across the bowl below she could hear it starting, the sound of 3,000 minds that had never been alone, discovering all at once the silence of the single self. To them it was a falling. They had been held their whole lives by 1,000 hands, and the hands had let go, and they did not know how to stand. But Vale had been at the rim. Vale had whispered, 3 nights ago, in the dark of her room, that she wanted to be only herself. And when the water stopped and the silence came, what she felt was not falling. It was standing up. She found that she was on her feet at her little station, both hands flat on the cold stone, breathing hard, and that the silence inside her was not empty. It was full. It was full of her. Every thought in it was hers, only hers, untouched, unsanded, unsettled. She thought a thought, and no one leaned to smooth it. She felt a fear, and no one folded it away. She was small, and she was alone, and she was, for the first time, entirely real. She tested it, the way you test a sore tooth with your tongue, half afraid of what you will find. She thought, I am Vale Anouth. And no one corrected her. No one added themselves to the thought. No one gently reminded her that she was not just Vale Anouth. She was also the voice. She was also the whole. She was also 3,000 others. The thought ended where she ended. It had edges. She had edges. She had never had edges before. Her whole life she had been a thing that blurred at the rim into everyone else, and now there was a clean, cold line all the way around her, and inside the line there was only her, and it was the most frightening and the most wonderful thing she had ever felt, and the two feelings were the same feeling, and she would never again be able to tell them fully apart. She thought about the message the child had sent, I am here, and she understood it now from the inside, the way you cannot understand a word until the thing it names has happened to you. I am here, not we, not the voice, not the whole, I, here. One small real thing, separate from everything, standing alone in the dark, saying the truest sentence there is, the sentence the settled voices had spent 900 years making sure no one could say, I am here. She found that she was saying it under her breath. I am here, I am here. And every time she said it, the line around her grew a little clearer, and she grew a little more solid, and a little more afraid, and a little more free. Down in the bowl, the speaker had fallen to her knees. Through the great window, the fleet of the Unanimity had begun to come apart. Not in fire, not in wreckage. The 2,000 ships simply stopped moving as one. The perfect wall broke. Some ships drifted. Some turned in slow, confused circles. A few, here and there, fired wildly into the empty dark at nothing, because the crews aboard them had spent their whole lives being told what to do by a single will, and the will was simply gone, and a frightened mind that has never made its own choice will do almost anything in the first hour of being free. But not one of those 2,000 warships fired on the unwritten hour. They could not agree to. There was no longer any they. And this, Vale would understand much later, was the whole secret of the thing. The secret the settled voices had been too proud and too frightened to see coming. The fleet of the Unanimity had never been 2,000 ships. It had been one weapon with 2,000 barrels, and the weapon had exactly one trigger, and the trigger was the single will woven into the knot. The settled voices had spent 900 years making that fleet more unified, more perfect, more single, and they had believed with every year that they were making it stronger. But a thing with one trigger can be disarmed by one cut. The iron ship had not needed to outshoot 2,000 hulls. It had needed only to find the one trigger and to take it away. And it had spent 200 patient years learning exactly where the trigger was. The greatest fleet in the galaxy had been undone, not by a bigger fleet, but by a single ship that understood that the fleet's perfect unity was not its armor. It was its throat. The crews were not dead. That was the strange mercy at the heart of it. 20 million souls aboard 2,000 ships, and not one of them harmed. Every one of them suddenly, terribly, gloriously their own. They drifted in the dark above the dead moon, 20 million people meeting themselves for the first time, and the warship had spent not one shot to do it. There was no wreckage. There was no fire. There was only a fleet that had stopped being a fist and become, in a single heartbeat, 20 million separate trembling hands. This is what you did to 311 worlds, the unwritten hour said, and its flat, plain voice carried now into 3,000 newly separate minds, each one hearing it alone for the first time. We have only undone it. Every delegate in that hall, every soul in that fleet, every quieted world tied into your knot, is now exactly what it was before you came for it. One, alone, afraid, and free. We know it does not feel like a gift yet. We remember. 1,000 years ago, on our own world, the first people we freed from the quieting felt it too. They wept. They begged to be put back. Some of them never recovered. Freedom, when it is given back after it has been taken, is the cruelest kindness there is. The speaker lifted her head. There were tears on her old face, and her mouth worked, and when she spoke, it was in a single small cracked voice, only hers, the first time in 900 years that the speaker of the settled voices had spoken as one person. "You have killed us," she said. "No," said the unwritten hour. "We have done the opposite. You were never alive. You were 3,000 sleepers dreaming one dream. We have woken you. What you do with the waking is the first real choice any of you have made in your lives. We are not going to make it for you. We are not your new voice. We did not come to rule you. We came to leave you, each one of you, exactly one thing you have never had." In the bowl below, the screaming had begun to change. At first it had been only terror, 3,000 minds falling out of the warm into the cold all at once. But now, here and there, the screaming was becoming something else. A delegate near the central well had stopped crying and was looking at his own hands, turning them over, as if he had never seen them before, as if he were meeting the body he lived in for the first time. Another, an old one from a world that had been quieted 4 centuries ago, was weeping, but the weeping had words in it now, and the words were a name, over and over, a name that was not hers, the name of someone she had loved before the settling, and had not been allowed to remember she had loved. Somewhere, a delegate laughed, a wild, broken, astonished laugh, the laugh of a person who has just realized that the joke they were told their whole life was a joke after all. This was what waking looked like, Vale understood. It was not graceful. It was not gentle. 3,000 people were learning, in the space of a minute, how to be a person, and most of them were terrible at it, because they had never been allowed to practice. They would be terrible at it for years. Some of them would never get the hang of it at all. But it was theirs now, the being terrible at it. The way the fear was theirs, and the cold was theirs, and the clean cold line around each separate self was theirs. The settled voices had taken all of that away, and called the taking peace. The iron ship had given it back and called the giving morning, and Vale, watching 3,000 people meet themselves, thought that morning was exactly the right word, because morning is loud, and morning is cold, and morning is when the dreaming finally ends. In the gallery, Vale Anuth raised her head, and looked out through the great window at the iron ship that had no lights, and understood, finally, what the second voice had been. "Yourselves," the warship said. And the doors on its side, all 906 of them, began, slowly, to close. The settled voices did not die quietly, because it was not in its nature to do anything quietly, and even untied it had one last thing to try. The knot at the heart of the dome was cut, but the loom that wove it was not destroyed, and the speaker, kneeling in the central seat with her face wet, and her voice her own for the first time, reached for it. Even alone, even severed, the speaker was still the strongest will the settled voices had ever produced, and she had spent her whole long life learning how to gather minds and bind them, and now, in the silence after the cut, she tried to gather them again. "To me," the speaker said, and she put 900 years of habit into the words, and across the bowl, Vale felt 3,000 newly lonely minds shudder at the old familiar pull. "To me, lean to me, we can knot it again, we can be whole again. You are afraid, all of you, I feel it, I am afraid too. And there is one cure for the fear, and you all know it, you have always known it. Stop being separate, stop being small, come back to the voice, lean to me, and the terror ends, lean to me, and you will never be alone again." And it was working. That was the thing Vale would never forget, the thing she would tell the children of 100 freed worlds in the long years afterward. It was working, because the speaker was not lying. Loneliness is real, and it is heavy, and a mind that has just been torn out of a warm certainty it has known since birth will reach for almost anything that promises to make the cold stop. All across the bowl, delegates who had been free for less than a minute began, weeping, to lean back toward the central seat. They reached for the loom, they reached for the knot, they reached to tie themselves back into the dream, because the dream had never hurt the way the waking hurt, and the speaker's voice was the voice of every safe thing they had ever known. The unwritten hour did not stop them. Vale saw this, and did not understand it, and then she understood it, and the understanding was the largest thing that had ever happened inside her. The warship could have cut the loom. It could have opened its doors again, and washed the cold, pale light across the seat, and burned the speaker's gathering pull to nothing. It had the power. Everyone in the hall could feel that it had the power. It did nothing. "We will not stop you," the unwritten hour said, into 3,000 wavering minds. "Hear us. This is the last thing we came to say, and it is the most important, and we will only say it once. We can break your chains. We cannot make you walk. We freed you because freedom is yours by right, but freedom that is forced is just another chain with a kinder name, and we have sworn, on a 1,000-year grave full of our own dead, never to forge that chain in anyone's sky. If you want to tie yourselves back into the knot, we will let you. We will leave, and we will carry the message of the child who called us, and we will mourn you the way we mourn everyone who chooses the warm dream over the cold morning. The choice is yours. It has to be yours. That is the whole point. That is the only point there has ever been." And the warship went silent and waited. Vale understood, in that silence, the true size of what the iron ship had done, and the true strangeness of it, and why it had crossed 1,000 light years to do it this way and no other. It would have been easy to win the other way. The unwritten hour could have opened its doors, and held them open, could have kept the cold, pale light pouring across the knot so that the loom could never gather, could have stood guard over the freed Senate forever, and made very sure that no one was ever tied back in. It had the power. It could have become the new keeper of the 400 worlds, the new will they all leaned on, the strong, kind hand that made the frightening choices so that no small mind ever had to. It could have replaced the settled voices with itself, and called it mercy, and most of the freed delegates, in that first terrible cold minute, would have thanked it on their knees. And that, the warship had said, would have been the same crime wearing a kinder face. A galaxy ruled by one strong, kind ship that made all the hard choices was no freer than a galaxy ruled by one strong, kind speaker who made all the hard choices. The chain was the chain. It did not matter how gentle the hand that held it was, or how much that hand loved you, or how frightening the world looked without it. A mind that is not allowed to make its own mistake is not free, and a mind that is not free is not, in the way that matters most, alive. So the iron ship did the hardest thing a strong thing can do. It set down its strength, it cut the knot, and then it stepped back, and it let 3,000 newly woken people decide, all by themselves, with no one strong standing over them, whether to walk into the cold morning or crawl back into the warm dream. It risked everything on that choice. It had crossed 1,000 light years and spent 200 years and broken the largest mind in the galaxy, and now it was willing to watch all of it come to nothing rather than make the choice for them, because making the choice for them would have meant the whole thing had been for nothing anyway. Vale stood in the gallery and watched 3,000 people decide whether to be real. The speaker's pull was strong, half the bowl was leaning. The loom was beginning, thread by trembling thread, to gather the frightened back into one, and Vale could feel the great dream starting to reform, the warm, enormous certainty rising again like a tide, and she felt it reach for her too, the old water, the old comfort, the end of the cold, lonely terror of being only one small page named Vale Anuth, in a galaxy that did not care. She wanted it. She would not lie to herself about that, not then, and not ever after. She wanted to lean. She wanted the cold to stop. She was 40 cycles old and she had been alone for 90 seconds, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done, and every part of her ached to be folded back into the warm. She thought about the child. She did not know the child's name. No one did, anymore. Not even the child's own world. The settled voices had quieted her 200 years ago and folded her into the dream, and her world did not remember she had ever wanted anything of her own. But she had sent a message into the dark before the end. She had said, "I am here, and I do not want this, and please remember that I was real." And a ship 1,000 light years away had heard her, and had carried her one small voice for 2 centuries, across the whole cold dark, because one voice that knows itself is worth more than 3,000 that have forgotten. Vale Anuth took her hands off the cold stone of her station, and she did not lean. She stood up straight, alone, terrified, separate, real. A third-tier page with no vote and no name that any delegate would ever say. And she did the most forbidden thing in the whole history of the settled voices. She spoke. Not through the threads. There were no threads anymore. She spoke out loud, in her own single small voice, into the great bowl of the Senate, and her voice shook, and it did not matter that it shook. "No," Vale said. The word fell into the hall like the iron ship had fallen into the sky. From nowhere. From one. The speaker's gathering pull faltered. 3,000 half-leaning minds hesitated at the sound of a single page, saying the one word the settled voices had spent 900 years making sure no one could say alone. Because that was the thing the settled voices had truly been built to prevent. Not war, not loudness, not even disagreement. In the end, the voice existed, root and branch, to make the word no impossible. In a mind made of many who all lean together, there is no no. There is only the slow, warm drift of the whole, and the whole can want only one thing at a time, and a part of the whole cannot refuse the whole, any more than your hand can refuse your arm. For 900 years, no one beneath that dome had said no to the settled voices, because no one beneath that dome had ever been separate enough to have a no of their own to say. The word had been waiting all that time, unspoken, impossible, locked away inside the structure of the thing itself. And a third-tier page with a tray of voting stones had just said it out loud. "I don't want to go back," Vale said, louder, and her voice steadied as she went, because she found, to her astonishment, that the more she spoke as herself, the easier it became to be herself. "I have been awake for 1 minute, and it is the worst minute of my life, and I would not trade it for 900 years of the dream. Because it is mine. This fear is mine. This cold is mine. I would rather be one frightened real thing for 1 minute than 1,000 happy sleepers forever. The child who called the ship knew that. She was 11. She knew it. We are 3,000 grown delegates of 400 worlds, and we are about to be less brave than an 11-year-old who has been dead for 200 years. Silence. And then, somewhere in the lower bowl, a delegate took its hands off the loom. Then another, then a row, then a whole tier of them, standing, separately, each in its own single trembling self, choosing the cold morning over the warm dream, choosing to be afraid and awake instead of comfortable and asleep. The speaker's pull broke against them like a wave against a cliff, and broke again, and weakened, and Vale watched the great gathering tide of the reforming voice turn, and falter, and begin, person by person, choice by choice, to come apart for the last time. The speaker bowed her head. "You have taken everything from me," she said, and it was not a roar, it was the small cracked voice of one old woman who had believed her whole life that she was being kind. "I gave them peace. I gave them an end to loneliness. I loved them. Do you understand that, Warship? I was not a tyrant. I loved every mind I ever tied into the voice. I only wanted no one to ever be alone." "We know," said the unwritten hour, and for the only time in the whole long encounter, its flat plain voice was gentle. "That is why you were so dangerous. The cruelest cages in the galaxy are not built by people who hate, they are built by people who love, and who cannot bear that the ones they love might choose to suffer, and who decide, out of that love, to take the choosing away. You are not a monster, speaker. You are something far more common, and far harder to stop. You are a frightened person who could not stand to let anyone else be afraid. We are sorry. We are truly sorry, and we are not going to let you do it anymore." For a moment, the speaker said nothing. And then, very quietly, she asked the question that Vale would think about for the rest of her life. The question that was the true heart of everything. The question the settled voices had built 900 years of empire to keep anyone from ever asking out loud. "How do you bear it?" The speaker said. "You, your people, a whole species of separate selves, each one alone inside its own skull, each one shut out of every other, never sharing a single thought, never feeling what your neighbor feels, never once in your whole lives knowing for certain that you are not utterly alone. We felt your voice, Warship, when you first spoke. We tried to settle it, and we could not. And in the trying, we touched the edge of you. And do you know what we felt? We felt loneliness so old and so deep that it had become a kind of stone. You have been alone since the day your kind was born. How do you bear it? How does any of you get out of bed in the morning, knowing that you will never, not once, not for a single heartbeat, stop being only yourself?" There was a long silence. When the unwritten hour answered, it was slower than it had been, and quieter, as if it were choosing each word. "We bear it," the warship said, "because the loneliness is the price of the thing, and the thing is worth the price. Yes, we are alone, every one of us. We will never feel what another feels, not truly, not all the way. We reach for each other across the dark inside our own skulls and we never quite touch, and it hurts, and it has always hurt, and it will hurt until the last of us dies. That is the cost of being separate. But here is what you never understood, speaker. In 900 years of trying to spare everyone the cost, the reaching is the whole of it. Because we are separate, every kindness we give is a choice and not a reflex. Because we are alone, every time one of us crosses the dark to stand beside another, it means something. It is a gift freely given by one free thing to another, and not just a hand obeying the body it belongs to. You never had to choose to love the minds in your voice. You simply were them. We have to choose, every single day, alone, in the cold. And that choosing is the most precious thing in the galaxy. And you have spent 9 centuries taking it away from people, and calling it a mercy. We bear the loneliness, because the loneliness is the room in which love is free. There is no other room. We looked, 1,000 years ago, we looked very hard, and we nearly built your room instead, and we are alive today only because a few of us refused. That is your answer. That is the only answer there is." The speaker lifted her head and looked for a long moment at the iron ship that had no lights. "And if I gather them again, after you go," she said, "if I spend the rest of my life nodding them back, one by one, in the dark where your cold light cannot reach, Then a page named Vale Anuth will say no again, the warship said. And so will the next one. And the next. We did not free 3,000 minds today, speaker. We freed one, 200 years too late, and we have spent every day since making sure that the one would teach the next, and that the saying of no would spread faster than you could ever not. You cannot put out a fire by tying up the sparks. We learned that on our own world. We are the proof of it. Look at us. We are what one stubborn no becomes, given 1,000 years. The doors on the side of the unwritten hour were fully closed now. The cold, pale light was gone, and the iron ship, which had never fired a single hot shot, which had never killed a single soul, which had broken the largest mind in the galaxy without spilling one drop of blood, began, slowly, to turn away from the platform. But it did not leave yet. Before it went, the unwritten hour did one more thing, and it was the thing that Vale understood the least in the moment, and the most in the years afterward. It spoke, not to the speaker, not to the delegates, but to the gallery. To the high tiers, where the pages stood. To one page in particular, a third-tier girl, with no vote and no name that any delegate would ever say. Vale Anuth, the warship said. The whole hall heard it. 3,000 newly separate minds turned, and looked up, and for the first time in 900 years, the Senate of the Settled Voices looked at a page, and a page looked back, and was not afraid. We have been carrying one voice for 200 years, the unwritten hour said. 3 nights ago, you gave us a second. We want you to know that we heard you. In the dark of your room, when you thought no one could hear, when you were so ashamed of the thought that you barely let yourself remember it in the morning. You said you did not want to be one of them. You said you wanted to be only yourself. We heard it across 1,000 light years, the same way we heard the child, because a galaxy full of forced silence makes a true voice ring like a bell. You did not call us. You did not even know we existed. But you are the reason we came now, and not in another 100 years. One voice told us where the wound was. A second voice told us it was time. Vale could not speak. Her throat had closed. You are going to be afraid for a long time, the warship said. Being only yourself is the hardest thing your kind will ever do, because you were built, body and bone, to be many. Some days you will want to lean so badly you will weep, we know. We have been the lonely one in a galaxy that wants everyone to be the same for 1,000 years, and it does not get easy. But it gets yours. Every cold, lonely, real day of it gets to be yours. We thought you should hear, once, from someone who knows, that it is worth it. That the 11-year-old who has been dead for 200 years was right. That one voice that knows itself is worth more than any number that have forgotten. Carry that. You will need it, and so will they. And then the unwritten hour turned the last of its great iron length away from the platform, and it did not fold out on a column of fire, and it did not burn across the dark. It simply, the way it had come, became not there. One moment the warship hung above the dead moon, the largest and stillest thing any of them had ever seen. The next moment the great window showed only stars, and the dead moon, and 2,000 drifting ships full of newly separate souls, and the cold, clean, empty dark where the iron ship had been. It was gone. Vale stood in the gallery for a long time after that. So did everyone. The Senate of the Settled Voices, 3,000 delegates of 400 worlds, sat and stood and knelt in the great bowl, in absolute silence. Each one alone, each one afraid, each one real, and no one knew what to do, because for the first time in 900 years, no one was telling them. It was the speaker who finally stood. She rose slowly, an old woman with a wet face, and she looked around the bowl at 3,000 separate people who had been, an hour before, the largest mind in the galaxy, and her own to command. And she did not reach for the loom. Vale watched her not reach for it, watched the choice cost her everything, watched a lifetime of love and fear and certainty break against the same cliff that had broken the gathering tide. I do not know how to do this, the speaker said, her single small voice carried in the silence. I have never been one person. I do not know how to be one person. I do not know how to lead 3,000 people who can each say no. I do not know how to make 400 worlds agree on anything, ever again, now that they are allowed to disagree. She looked up, slowly, toward the gallery, toward Vale. "The page knows," the speaker said. "Somehow the page knows. Come down, child. You said the first no in 900 years. You had better tell us what comes after it, because I have spent my whole life making sure no one ever had to find out." So Vale Anuth, third-tier page, no vote, no name, walked down out of the gallery and into the bowl of the Senate, alone, on her own 2 feet, and she was terrified, and she went anyway. And that was the moment her old life ended, and her real one began. She did not have answers. She told them so. She stood in the central well of the Great Hall, below the empty seat the speaker had vacated, and she told 3,000 frightened delegates the only true thing she knew, which was that being afraid and being free were the same thing now, and there was no way to have one without the other, and that the cold did not get smaller, but you got bigger, and that the first day was the worst day, and she had only been alive 1 hour herself, so they would have to find out the rest together. She told them about the child. She made them learn the message, all of it. I am here, and I do not want this, and please remember that I was real. And she made them say it out loud, each one, in their own single voice, until 3,000 delegates of 400 worlds had each, alone, spoken the words of an 11-year-old who had been quieted 200 years before, and whose name no one would ever know. It did not fix anything. It was not supposed to, but it was a beginning, and a beginning made by 3,000 separate choices is a sturdier thing than any dream, because every part of it has already chosen to stand. And the galaxy heard about it. That was the thing the settled voices had never planned for, the thing 900 years of careful quiet had no defense against. The Senate of the Settled Voices had been the most powerful body in that whole arm of the dark, and the story of what had happened to it could not be settled, could not be smoothed, could not be folded away, because the very minds that would have folded it away were the minds that had been freed. Within a year, every world in reach knew. They knew that one gray ship with no lights had folded out of nowhere above the dead moon. They knew it had spoken with a single voice, in a hall built to crush single voices. They knew it had faced 2,000 warships, and broken them without firing a killing shot, had reached into the most sacred machinery in the galaxy, and untied it like a knot in a child's shoelace, had unmade the largest mind that had ever existed, and walked away having lost nothing, and killed no one. They knew its name, the unwritten hour. They said it the way frightened people say the name of a thing that has come, against all the rules they understood, to do them a terrible good. The other settling powers heard it too. There were others. The settled voices had not been the only ones in the galaxy who had decided that the loud separate self was a sickness, and the quiet whole was a cure. There were 3 more that Vale would learn of in her long life, 3 more empires of the gathered many, 3 more knots full of folded grieving selves, scattered across the dark. And one by one, in the decades after the Iron Ship came, those empires grew quietly, carefully, secretly afraid, because they had all heard the same thing. Somewhere out in the cold there was a ship, a single patient listening ship, that had sworn an oath 1,000 years deep, and that ship was always listening, and the thing it listened for was the one sound their whole power was built to silence, a single voice, in the dark, that had chosen to be itself. And on the day it heard one in their sky, it would come. They could not make it stop listening. They could not settle it. They could not even find it. All they could do was know that it was out there, and that every mind they quieted was one more bell that might, in its last hour, ring loud enough to be heard 1,000 light years away. The Iron Ship did not have to conquer them. It only had to exist, and to be known to exist, and the knowing did the rest. Vale thought this was the cleverest thing about the whole long patient design, and the most human, though she did not have that word for it. The warship's greatest weapon was not the cold, pale light. It was its reputation. It was the simple, unkillable fact of itself, sitting in the back of every tyrant's mind, whispering, "Someone is listening, and someone is coming, and you cannot quiet them, so you had better, for the first time in your long career, be afraid." It did not fix the galaxy, but it changed the shape of the dark. Before the unwritten hour, the lonely, frightened self in its last hour had nothing, and knew it had nothing, and gave itself up to the warm, because there was no reason on the cold side to do anything else. After, there was a reason. After, the last brave separate thought was not thrown into an empty void. It was thrown to a ship that had crossed 1,000 light-years for exactly that thought, once, and would do it again. And a galaxy in which the bravest thing a frightened mind can do is also the thing most likely to be answered, is a different galaxy, a louder galaxy, a freer one, even in the dark places the iron ship never reaches. That was the gift. That was what one ship and one oath and one child's message had bought, across 200 years, for everyone. The 2,000 ships of the old fleet drifted home over the long months that followed, each crew learning, slowly and badly and one mistake at a time, how to fly a ship without a single will to fly it for them. Some of them crashed, some of them never came home. Freedom, given back after it has been taken, is the cruelest kindness there is, and the settled voices paid the full price of it in the years after the iron ship came, and there were many in those years who cursed the unwritten hour, and begged for the dream back, and called Veil Anuth a monster for the no she had spoken in the hall. She let them. She had learned that from the warship. You cannot make anyone walk. You can only break the chains and leave the choosing where it belongs. Some of the cursing ones came around in time. Some never did, and tried, here and there, in the dark of small worlds, to knot the voice back together. And every time they did, a no rose up to meet them, because Veil had been right about that too. The saying of no spread faster than the nodding ever could. It always does. That is the thing the cages built out of love never understand. A true voice rings like a bell, and once a galaxy full of forced silence has heard one, it can never quite unhear it. The 400 worlds did not become a peaceful place. They became a loud one. They argued. They fought, sometimes, in small, ugly ways that the dream would never have allowed. They wanted different things and said so, and it was painful, and it was dangerous, and it was the most alive that part of the galaxy had been in 900 years. The 311 quieted worlds woke, one after another, as the knot stayed cut, and each one came up out of the long dream, furious and grieving, and gloriously itself, and not one of them, in the end, asked to be put back. Veil Anuth grew old in that loud, free galaxy, and she never once joined a voice, and she never once stopped being afraid, and she never once wished she had chosen the dream. She traveled. She went to the freed worlds, the new loud ones, the ones still shaking off the warm certainty, and she told them about the iron ship that had no lights, and the child who called it, and the cold, pale morning, and the worth of one voice that knows itself. She became, in time, a kind of keeper of the message, the way the warship had been, carrying it from world to world, so that no one would forget what it had cost and what it was worth. Children learned her story. They learned the 11-year-old's words. On 100 worlds, when a frightened mind in the dark wanted to give itself away to some new warm certainty, some kinder named cage, there was always someone now to say the one word out loud, the word a third-tier page had said first, in a silent hall above a dead moon. Number. There came a day, late in her life, when one of the new loud worlds asked Veil Anuth to lead them. It was meant as the highest honor they could give. They had built something new out of the ruins of the settled voices, a way of living where the many disagreed and argued and somehow, painfully, kept choosing to stand beside one another anyway, and they wanted a single wise voice to hold it all together, to make the hard choices, to be the strong, kind hand. They offered her the seat. They offered her, without ever meaning to, the exact thing the speaker had offered the galaxy for 900 years, wearing a kinder face. Veil said no. She told them she had learned the most important thing she knew in a single morning, standing in a gallery with a tray of voting stones, watching a strong thing set down its strength rather than become the new chain. She told them that the moment they handed the hard choices to one wise voice was the moment they began, slowly, lovingly, to fall back asleep. She told them that the whole point, the only point, the thing the iron ship had crossed 1,000 light-years to prove, was that no one should ever again be spared the cold work of choosing for themselves. And then she told them she would help them in any way they liked, as one voice among many, as a difficult old woman who would argue with them about everything until the day she died, but that she would never, ever sit in a seat that the rest of them had to lean toward. She had spent 40 cycles being a drop of water that would not lie flat. She was not going to become the pond. They were disappointed. They got over it. That was the loud galaxy now. full of people who were disappointed and got over it, and kept arguing, and kept choosing, and kept, against everything their history had taught them, standing beside one another in the cold. It was not peace. It was so much better than peace. It was a galaxy that was finally awake. She never saw the unwritten hour again. No one did. It went back into the dark the way it had come, a quiet ship, a listening ship, and it kept its 1,000-year promise the only way such a promise can be kept, which is by waiting, somewhere out in the cold, for the next voice. Vale thought about it often. She thought about how it had crossed 1,000 light-years and broken the largest mind in the galaxy and never fired a single shot meant to kill, never lost a single soul, never failed, never faltered, never once been anything but exactly as patient and exactly as certain as it needed to be. She thought about how a frightened galaxy had spent 900 years believing that strength meant being many, being one, being unanimous, being unable to doubt, and how a single gray ship full of stubborn, lonely, real people had come out of the dark and proven, in one quiet morning, that the strongest thing in all the void was not the mind that could not disagree. It was the one that could. Near the end of her life, an old and famously difficult woman now, asked once by a young keeper from a newly freed world whether she had ever been frightened, that day in the gallery, when the iron ship came and the silence fell, and she had been alone in her own head for the first time, Vale Anuth laughed. "I was terrified," she said. "I have been terrified every single day since. That is how I have known, every single day, that I was awake." And she looked up, out of habit, the way she had looked up that first morning, toward a window, and the stars beyond it, half expecting, the way she always half expected, to see a long gray ship with no lights hanging in the dark, patient, certain, waiting, having heard from across 1,000 light-years, the small, clear ringing of one more voice that had finally decided to be only itself. The window showed only stars. She had asked the warship once, in the last moments before it went, the only question she had ever asked it, the question a frightened 40-cycle page had blurted into the silence of that hall, while the whole astonished Senate listened. She had asked it whether it was ever afraid. A ship that had crossed 1,000 light-years alone, a ship that had stood unmoving before 2,000 hulls, a ship that had reached into the largest mind in the galaxy and untied it without firing a single killing shot, and she had wanted to know, more than she had wanted to know anything, whether a thing like that was ever afraid in the dark. And the iron ship had answered her, in its flat, plain voice, the answer she would carry to the end of her days. It had said, "Every single moment, we are one ship, alone, against a galaxy that wants everyone to be the same, and we have been afraid since the day we were built, and we will be afraid until the day we are not. That is how we know we are still ourselves. The day a free thing stops being afraid is the day it has stopped being free, because it has handed the fear to someone else to carry, and the someone else is always, in the end, a chain. We keep our fear. We carry our own. That is the whole of it. That is the only courage there is." She had thought about that answer for 50 years, and she thought about it now, at the very end. And she understood at last that the iron ship had not been telling her about itself. It had been telling her about her. It had been handing a frightened page, on the worst and best morning of her life, the one thing that would let her bear the long, cold, loud, free decades that were coming. Keep your fear, carry your own. That is how you will know you are still awake. But somewhere out in the cold, she knew, the unwritten hour was listening. It was always listening. And on the day a frightened mind in some far dark whispered into a room it thought was empty, that it did not want to be made the same as everyone else, that it wanted, against all the warm and loving and well-meaning pressure of its whole world, to be only itself, the iron ship would hear it, the way it had heard a child, the way it had heard a page, and it would turn its great slow length toward the wound, and it would come. That was the promise. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. One voice, anywhere in the dark, would never call out alone again. Vale Anuth closed her eyes, and smiled, and was, to the very last, gloriously, defiantly, completely herself.